Who will replace Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes has been a hotly contested topic since he announced his departure, but over the Monza weekend, Kimi Antonelli officially claimed the seat and made his free practice debut, even if it was rather short-lived. As ever, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Jake Boxall-Legge, aka JBL, and Filip Cleeren, aka Phil. Now, JBL, just how much excitement was there over Antonelli making his debut and him being there in Monza at the weekend?
I think it was huge. There were two aspects to that. Number one, finally getting to see this kind of mythical figure, I guess, to a lot of people, because there's a lot of people that don't watch Formula 2 or don't keep abreast of the junior series. And yet, you know, this child effectively has kind of entered stage left and has been the kind of heir to Hamilton's throne at Mercedes, let's say. And so for a lot of people, it was the first time that they got to see him in action. And so there was a lot of buzz about him, obviously. The fact that it was at the Italian Grand Prix and he is an Italian driver, that added a little bit more intrigue, a little bit more pressure, let's say, as well. Suggestions that an announcement was due soon as well. You know, this felt like people sort of getting like a demo before he, I guess, took the Mercedes seat. So it was a huge thing. And we'll get into his, let's say, you know, burned quickly but burned brightly practice session in a bit. But yeah, I think there's a lot of hype about him, and I think a lot of people had commented, I don't think a rookie has ever sort of had this much hype since maybe Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen back in the day, and that kind of gives you the sense of the magnitude of talent or magnitude of potential, let's say, that he's got. Yeah,
we have to trust what Mercedes are saying, and that they are firmly behind him. Phil, let's just talk a bit about Antonelli and his performance. It was cut short, as we know. Those two push laps cut short after that spin and crash into the wall at Parabolica. But what do you think? What did you make of that rather short glimpse we got of him?
Yeah, it was clearly a huge task for him to debut for Mercedes in Italy in front of his own fans. It's very much a case of being thrown in at the deep end. I know he's done a lot of testing in old cars, but this was his first time in the current Mercedes. So it was a massive challenge. And yeah, obviously Mercedes tried to spin it as he was astonishingly quick. He was very impressive with his speed. He was quicker through the Lesmo than anybody else. And yes, he was quick right out of the gate. You just have to question the wisdom of should he have been. I mean, he was only in for FP1. He needed to give the car back to George Russell afterwards, collect data, keep it on the island, and then, you know, to be spinning off after a handful of laps, you do wonder, you know, why did he have to push so hard? But again, he just turned 18, first time in the car, so you do have to sort of not brush it on the carpet, but you have to give him some credit for that. It was a huge test, and he's going to learn a lot from that, and it's 2025 when it counts for him. So, yeah, it was a bit unnecessary, but it is a valuable experience at the same time. So it's one of those, youthful sins that you should maybe forgive.
Gotta say, if you, I, or JBL got crowbarred into one of those F1 cars and given the keys and off we went, I reckon we could drive those cars pretty fast. We wouldn't make it round the track, we'd end up in a wall, but we could go pretty fast. So driving quickly isn't what it's all about, is it? You've got to make sure you turn at the right point and brake at the right point. But with that in mind, and either of you can take this, it's normally a cardinal sin, isn't it, that a young driver crashes the car, causing the team work, having an impact potentially on the owner of that current car, in this case George Russell. Do you think it's been glossed over a little bit too much with all the hype around him, that actually, yeah, there's a huge amount of hype, but what did he do? Well, he binned the car very early on.
I think yes and no. I think that he gets a relative free pass for it versus, let's say, a couple of seasons ago when Haas was looking at drivers. Antonio Giovinazzi, obviously a Formula 1 veteran by that point, but then Ferrari reserve, did an FP1 session for Haas and binned it straight away. And that eventually nuked his chances of getting a drive there. So he gets it a little bit more easy, but at the same time, and Phil said yes, he was fast, but he put it in the wall. But he was very, very quick. And I was doing the maths on this. So Lewis Hamilton had done a lap in the 1 minute 23s at that point in the session. Antonelli was about to come round before he binned it. If he'd repeated the same final sector that he'd done on his previous lap, he'd have done a 1:22.998, I think, which for that point in the session was very, very quick, and presumably he would have kept going quicker and quicker and quicker with track evo and setup changes and that kind of thing. So I can't help but be impressed, and I'm sort of one of the people that wants to give him the benefit of the doubt with the crash. Yes, of course, it was a lot of work, and yes, it set George Russell back quite a lot. But I'd rather see a rookie make a mistake at the start and sort of scale it back than see... I think there have been a sort of few rookies in Formula One that haven't got up to the limit very, very quickly and just sort of fizzled out. I think there's a few rookies that have been sort of very, very sensible on track, but they haven't been very, very fast. Whereas if you sort of find the limits relatively early and make those rookie mistakes, then you are going to scale it back a little bit, and you're going to sort of go, okay, that is the limit. I need to come back a little bit from there and try and push that as far as I can, but know where it is. Whereas others, they don't know where it is and they never really get close to it. So I think it's sort of a psychological thing there. But yeah, I think ultimately in a lap and a half, I think he's done a lot more in his own career than a lot of people have done in 2 or 3 years. So that's my view on it.
That's a really good point, though, isn't it, Phil? That it's good for a driver to be fearless and to find the extreme, and then be able to pull it back from there. It's probably easier for a team principal and a coach to pull a driver back from the extreme than it is to lead them up to it, because you've got to get over quite a few hurdles. Staying with this, though, and Kimi Antonelli in particular, Toto Wolff said, I saw him in an interview, he said that when did he make the decision that Kimi Antonelli was going to be the driver to take over Lewis Hamilton's seat? And he said 5 minutes after he heard Lewis Hamilton was going to be leaving the team. And it seems to be a little bit like, he's our driver, we're going to put all of our pressure on him, all of our weight, all of our backing behind him. Do you think it was wise giving him his debut at Monza in front of his home fans if you want to try to protect him a little bit in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, on the 5-minute comments, maybe Toto decided to put Antonelli in the car after 5 minutes after he learned of Hamilton leaving, but he did spend 6 months chasing Max Verstappen. So at the time, there was no question of Max leaving Red Bull, but then obviously that option sort of opened up slightly, even if it was just 1%. So I can't blame him for going after Max, and then knowing that he had Antonelli as in the bank, being able to gain experience in old cars and in F2. So, obviously he was trying to get Max, and then he sort of realized that wasn't going to happen. In terms of giving Antonelli's debut, as I said before, it is a bit bold to do it in Italy, make the announcement as well. It's a lot of pressure, but that is what F1 is. It is a pressure cooker. There is a lot of hype around him. Mercedes are trying to protect him from that and from the media as well as they can, but you have to sink or swim in F1, and what happened at the weekend is sort of the new reality for Antonelli. So he's going to be taking a step back now, doing more testing, doing more F2, then he'll have another FP1 in Mexico, and he will hopefully have learned a lot from this, not just in terms of how he approaches FP1, but also how to deal with the attention around him. And yes, I think it was quite brutal to put him in a car and announce him in Monza of all places, but that is going to stand him in good stead, I think, in 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, I suppose if you want to see how a driver reacts to pressure, you stick him in the biggest pressure pot you possibly can, and if you're an Italian driver, it's Monza, isn't it? JBL, after that incident, a day later, 24 hours less than that, we got confirmation that Antonelli was going to be taking over from Lewis Hamilton in 2025. Do you think it's the right move for a long-term solution for Mercedes, or do you think it's maybe a little bit too soon for the 18-year-old? Because we often see drivers going into reserve positions, don't we? Development drivers, reserve drivers, before they step into the full seat.
You say reserve role, that's sort of like a low-pressure version of that. But actually, I think he's going to develop a little bit more rapidly in the race seat. And it'll be the sort of same net results, preparing for Formula One. 2025 is going to be that season where the pressure is off a little bit because he's learning his trade effectively. He's had this stratospheric rise through the junior categories. He was racing in F4 3 years ago. It's a huge ask for him, and it's a huge challenge. But I think Mercedes knows, okay, we've learnt from what we've done with our other junior drivers. Probably thought that they'd kept George Russell out of the sort of parent team, let's say, for too long. They're at Williams for 3 years, and I think you could see after the first year and a half that he was probably ready for the big time. It's kind of a difficult situation to manage, because what is right, what is wrong, what is right for one driver might be wrong for another driver. Verstappen didn't seem to sort of show any ills of being moved up to Formula One at a very young age. Lewis Hamilton didn't seem to show any ills of being moved up to McLaren straight off the bat. And, it didn't work out too badly for those drivers, did it? So I think ultimately, if you're good enough, you're old enough. That's the old adage of Formula One, isn't it? And I think he's good enough. Therefore, logic would dictate he's old enough to do it. When you look at Mercedes' approach to him, it has been sort of a little bit neither here nor there in the media, let's say. He's sort of been very, very protected to a certain degree. And I can understand that, because certain questions that people will ask. But ultimately, at the same time, thrown in the deep end at Monza, that's quite a big ask as well. So it's a hugely kind of interesting dichotomy there. Yes, he's being a little bit protected too much, but equally being thrown into the deep end at Monza does kind of show how he's able to deal with these situations and that kind of thing. I think, room for improvement in certain respects, but again, next year that'll be the learning season for him, and that's the year where it all sort of come to roost.
Yeah, as you say, some drivers it works for, others it doesn't. I mean, it remains to be seen whether it works for Kimi Antonelli, but the early indications, as you both say, are that it's a positive move and it's an exciting move for Mercedes. Phil, just going to give you the final note on Mercedes then. And the race at Monza, Lewis Hamilton finished 5th, George Russell finished 7th. They had a really hot end to the first half of the season, or just over the first half of the season, didn't they? Is this 5th and 7th, more of a clear indication of where the team really is at the moment?
I'm not sure we really know what Mercedes' true pace is, because they've been so up and down. And they've clearly made massive improvements to the car. We've seen that, as you say, the end of the first half of the season. 4 races, 3 wins. It was hugely impressive. Since then, McLaren have made another step with upgrades to Zandvoort. Ferrari they've probably been better than expected, especially in Zandvoort as well. Again, it's one of those teams that's struggling with the balance of the car, with these low-slung ground effect cars. Their cars seem to be on a knife edge, especially over a race distance. That, at one point the car is quick, but then can you sustain it over a whole race? They were definitely struggling with the balance again in Monza. So, yeah, well beaten by Ferrari and McLaren in the Zandvoort, and again in Monza on 2 different circuits. So that is a bit of a concern, but again, we'll have a lot of different circuits coming up. So it's so hard this season to really pick a definitive pecking order, because the gaps are small enough where it does sort of fluctuate enough.
It's certainly been a very exciting season, hasn't it? Fluctuating all over the place, and no one knows where it's going to go. We've got 8 races still to go on it. Well, look, that just about does it for this video. Make sure you stay tuned, though, because next time we'll be talking about Kevin Magnussen racking up enough points to secure himself a ban for a race. Franco Colapinto made his F1 debut at Williams. And what about a young driver race at the end of the season? If you like the sound of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. But until then, thanks for watching.